The following program is brought to you in part by the film Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace.
I read Joe Welch's book. Joe Welch was the lawyer for the United States Army against Joe McCarthy, and he inspired me. Also, I read Bobby Kennedy's book, Enemy of the People, about the Teamsters. I thought this got to be a great profession. McCarthy was attacking with Roy Cohn. Everybody was a communist. Joe Welch was a great lawyer from Boston who defended one of the guys in the real accusation, and it was a very strong memory for me. It was on 72nd Street. I was watching a movie and someone said, I'm getting a heart attack, I'm sick. So I ran to try and find a doctor for him, and it was very hard. No one wanted to come. No doctor wanted to touch him because they were afraid of lawsuits. And I think I was a second-year law student. I was appalled, but also wondering why. We all think doctors are very ethical. They should help people. We found out that they were being sued all the time, so they were afraid. So I created something called the Good Samaritan Law, which meant that doctors should help victims at accidents, etc., and their standard of negligence should be had to be extreme negligence on their part. What happened was that there was a newspaper article about how this person couldn't get help, and I was interviewed, I think, on WOR by a guy named John Wingate. And I began to study the situation. Lo and behold, I was a lawyer, and I wanted to know why no one came to the aid of victims. And I studied it, and the dean invited me to write for a publication called the Brooklyn Barrister, which was the publication of the Brooklyn Bar Association. It's a little bit like a law review. And the dean invited me to write an article on this, and so I did. And everybody in the assembly doesn't have the highest IQs, so if you submit an article that shows something that might have some teeth, they pass it. I think an assemblyman named Passati finally passed the bill. And what I wrote in the bill was that in the case of gross negligence, doctors would not be liable. So if you had a chiropodist trying to save a heart victim, you can't sue him because he didn't save the heart victim. Or better yet, an osteopath or a surgeon, somebody who's not a dermatologist trying to save a heart victim. So he'd be held to the standard of a dermatologist, not to the standard of a cardiologist. I think that it showed me various symbols of ethics. That we grew up, doctors were great people, lawyers were great people, maybe I'll get into an ethical profession. So it stimulated me to do A, research, and B, that it showed me that I could do something in society which might change society to the better. Look, I'm a Jew. Jews weren't big on Wall Street, and I went to Brooklyn Law School, not to Harvard, because my dad died young, and I needed a law school that would give me fixed hours so that I could sell fabric in the afternoon and do some other type of work. And this catapulted me to a Wall Street firm. And probably without that recognition, I would not have gotten there. Jews were not in vogue at that time. Not many yarmulkes and beards running around Whitman and Ransom. So I guess it helped. People were coming to me all the time. I don't think I ever gave out a card as a lawyer in my life. People would gravitate towards me. They'd get a feeling that I knew what I was doing. I could do it. And when I started out in law, my first case was a sprinkler case, where I had to read the sprinkler contract. And I did such a good job that the guy whom I was against hired me to be his lawyer on retainer. And I was 25 years old at that point. So what I did is I studied hard, and I tried to do the best job I could for clients, and they would gravitate towards me. But I really never gave out cards. I was a singer, or am a singer, and I knew a lot of show people. Lee Tully was a friend of mine in show business who did a comedy act about apartments, and it was stolen by a team called Henry and Hewlett on CBS, and they played it on television. And Lee Tully came to me and he said, you know, they stole my act. And I said, you know, you're right. He paid me $150, and we sued. And Henry and Hewlett, who were managed at that time by Charnoff and Winkler, who became great movie producers, by the way. Charnoff did, I think, Sylvester Stallone, and both these guys did. I'm not sure. Anyway, I sustained a cause of action that a comedian or anybody has a common law copyright in any words that he or she puts together, and that it's actionable. It showed that anybody who creates words and puts them in his own format has a right and a cause of action against anybody who tries to steal them. I think today it's all statutory. It became statutory copyright. I think today you must file with a copyright office. But in those days, you can go back to common law copyright. And I think this was very important for comedians, because they would write their own shtick and guys would steal it all the time. And so this really catapulted me into the show business world, because comedians by nature are neurotic people. And once they see one lawyer is good, hey, you got to call Charney. He's great. He's the greatest. You know, you could be a zero, but you've been in the papers. Everybody reads papers. Charney won this case, so it made a buzz. I was representing Jackie Mason. Jackie Mason at that time was a client of mine, and he had done some stuff, some material on the Smothers Brothers show. And it was about Vietnam. He said, why should people worry about Vietnam? They'll never get past Central Park. So it was a great line, and everybody thought they should use it. But CBS tried to censor it because Nixon was then the president. Vance Hartke was a senator from Indiana who was a very liberal guy against the Vietnamese War. And he was chairman of the subcommittee on communications. He came down to see us at a restaurant called Les Champs. It was myself and Jackie Mason and Hartke, and he loved the case. And he was a fighting type guy, and he said he was going to help us, and we got a lot of publicity. And the next morning he said, you know, I think you're a pretty smart guy. I'd like you to be my counsel. So show business took me to the Senate. Senator Hartke was on the Finance Committee. But truthfully, what I did for Vance Hartke is I was his outside counsel, and I'd come to Washington 1 or 2 times a week, and basically he would use me for counsel, and I didn't want to be on any payroll of the government. But in order to work for the government, you have to be on a payroll. So you go through a whole quagmire there. So I became counsel to the Veteran Affairs Committee, which he was chairman of, and I had to take $1 a year. They don't let you, because you can't get a Senate pass without being on the payroll, and so you get the payroll, you get the pass. But my real work with Hartke was bringing Jews out of the Soviet Union, and he was great on that. And that's a different story. Golda Meir, at that time the Prime Minister of Israel, was looking for people in the Senate or Congress who could help bring Jews out of the Soviet Union. And at that time, there were only 2 Jewish senators, Senator Rybakov and Senator Jacob Javits. And so one of her people contacted me and asked me if I would help. And I asked the senator if he would help, and he said, yes, go ahead and try to help. And so there was a special unit in the Prime Minister's office in Israel. It was a semi-Mossad type unit, and their whole existence was to bring Jews out of the Soviet Union. So Hartke gave me a stationery, and he had his name on the bottom, and I could use it for anything I wanted in order to bring Jews out of Russia. So he's passed on, but he should get heaven for that. He did a lot of good work on that. I think that he was a genuine humanist, that if he could help people, he would try to do it. He was an active guy, and he wanted to do things that would help humanity. He had great relationships with some cardinals who were imprisoned. He had a good relationship with Brezhnev, and he thought that it would be helpful to his career if he did a couple of things like this. Although one time, when we had a fundraiser, we didn't do too well with the Jewish crowd. He said to me, you know, John Birch Society was born in Indiana. I could be an anti-Semite in about 4 minutes. I said, Senator, why don't you wait 3 and then we'll decide what to do. And he didn't. But he came from a rough state. Indiana's not an easy state, especially for Jews. He was a highly skilled lawyer. He was mayor of Evansville, Indiana. But he was popping around all the time. He had a lot of kids, and he was always looking for ways to get his kids involved. And one of his kids became the treasurer of, I think, New Mexico. Later on in life, he started a law firm called Hartke, 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 and Hartke. It could have been Hartke and Hartke. All his kids were in there. 9 Hartkes you don't need to see. So I think people thought that he was a maverick. That's the better word for him. I think I gave more to the Senate than the Senate gave to me. I mean, there was a couple of big cases from Israel. One was Israel-British Bank. There was a big collapse, and it happened to be one of the biggest losers in that was Merchants Bank of Indianapolis, which was run by a fellow named Don Tanzel, became a great friend of mine. And Hartke had suggested to Tanzel that the only guy who could really help him out in Israel was myself. And what's his name? But Don Tanzel hired me, but I said on one condition that I would not take the case if it harmed the state of Israel. I would only take the case if I could find a way of making a compromise or a settlement without injuring the state of Israel. And ultimately we did it. Israel-British Bank was a bank in Israel. They had a branch in London. And they were taking deposits from all around the world, and lo and behold, they collapsed. So a lot of people were creditors in that bank, especially Don Tanzel. So what I did is I forced a joint liquidation. The defense was that they were autonomous, they were a British entity, and that we had no rights to move against the parent company. Well, we disproved that, and we didn't allow them to take that shield, and we were successful. Hartke knew a lot of people, and he was very active, and with me, we met Senator Abaresk from North Dakota, who was an Arab, one of the few first Arabs in the Senate. He had a pretty good connection with the Egyptians and with the Arab countries. So behind the scenes, I became a bit friendly with Abaresk. Couldn't say it publicly because the Jewish crowd wouldn't like it. But he was trying to become a middleman and try and bring Israel at that time closer to Egypt, etc. And Hartke loved that stuff. He loved bouncing around in international relations and being backdoor channel or front door channel, and he got me involved in all those things. So we were running around the world pretty much together, and he always loved to be involved in brokering huge things like that. That was his stuff. I think he wanted to be president. He ran for president ultimately, Vance Hartke. Nobody knows that. I still have a button. He called me up. He says, "You're my treasurer." 1976, he ran for president of the United States. He liked foreign affairs. He liked going to I remember we went to the Romanian embassy with him. He liked the Cold War places. You know, those days, Hungary was Cold War, Czechoslovakia, Russian. He went to the urinal with Brezhnev. He tried to make a deal with him in the urinal. I don't know how it worked out, but somebody might have got wet. I don't know what happened over there. Something must have happened. But he was close to Brezhnev. And he set me up to go to Russia. I went over there to, not Russia, the Soviet Union, to bring Jews out. And it was through his efforts that we were able to do it. And his one rule was always take a camera, because no matter who you see, if they tell you they don't want their picture taken, they all want their picture taken. So I met the chief of the OVIR, which was like the Gestapo guy who gave you the exit visas, and I met him, and I said, can we take your picture? He said, sure, why not? Nobody else had his picture, so if you go to my book on special counsel, you'll see a picture of the chief of the OVIR. We had an offer from Abaresk that he could set us up with the Speaker of the Egyptian Assembly and make a backdoor contact between the Israeli government and the Egyptians. And so we were on a state visit to Israel, and the Israeli embassy invited us over, and Hartke invited me to come as his counsel. And that was the real message of what we were trying to do over there. And Golda Meir turned us down. She said, it's hard to forget that. She said, we don't need any backdoor channel there. We're strong. No one's going to attack us. It was heady, you know, that I'm sitting there listening to this prime minister talk about what she thinks the country should be doing or not doing. I didn't have any idea that she was wrong at that point. You know, she was a prime minister. I felt she had more understanding about what Israel's capabilities were than we did, but I couldn't believe that she would turn down the ability for us to have communication or contact with the Egyptians at that time. To me, it was incredible. She was imperious, you know. She was a bit arrogant. She thought that she knew all the answers, and unfortunately she didn't. She was a great mama figure to Jewish people around the world, and probably a very nice person. But as far as public policy or foreign policy, I'm not sure she knew what was going on. And in my humble opinion, she could go down as the worst prime minister in the country, in the history of Israel. She was a terrible prime minister. It's always powerful to sit with powerful people, especially at a young age. You know, I was a young kid then. On the other hand, they're not all sagacious. They're not all that brilliant. I had been running around the Senate with Hartke. I'd met everybody in the Senate. The greatest thing about the Senate is the Yankee bean soup and lunch. That's the whole shtick of the Senate. You see Strom Thurmond running in, he can barely walk in. Harry Byrd comes in from Virginia. You're friendly with all these guys. They all say they're very polite. In those days, they all were, and it's a club. So you get to know all these people. Is it interesting? Yeah, it's obviously more interesting than just sitting around and doing wills. If you're a lawyer, it's certainly more fun. I think Hartke and I both talked about the fact that there was so much war going on in the Middle East. If there's something he could do, because he was in touch with the whole Arab world, maybe we could do something backdoor at that time with the Arab countries, because Abaresk really was, I think, the first Arab senator in the Senate. And they traded. There was a vote they trade. The senators all trade. So Abaresk needed somebody's vote, I think, in the Judiciary Committee. I don't remember. Hartke said he would do it if he would set us up with somebody in the Egyptian government so that we could maybe move the peace process forward. At that time, there was no real peace. There was the Yom Kippur War, and there was a standstill at that point between Egypt and Israel. And Hartke was available. I mean, he wasn't Jewish, so he could meet with the Egyptian ambassadors, he could meet with the Syrian ambassadors, he could meet with everybody. The fact that he had a Jewish lawyer, I don't think mattered to those people, but everybody in Hartke's office knew I was very pro-Israel and very involved with helping Israel. The Israeli government at that time was basically the labor government, and they were there since 1948. What that case did was give me a lot of publicity, because that was a huge case in Israel, so people got to know my name, and they also knew that I was bringing Jews out of the Soviet Union. And at that time, Wolf Blitzer, who became a good friend, was working for the AIPAC Jewish lobby, writing their newsletter or something, and he got interested in the case, and we developed a friendship out of that. And that later on led to me with Bob Lipschitz and President Carter. So you can say that from theatrical law, I jumped into foreign policy, and then Camp David, peace treaties, etc. Well, we had a common background. Wolf came from a traditional family. I came from a traditional family. His parents got to know me, and we became very friendly. We became very good friends. His parents were survivors, and I am a cantor, and his parents would book me to sing at his temple on the high holidays in Buffalo. So I sang there for a couple of years. And after that, it became a little bit of tradition to spend high holidays with Blitzer and his wife, where I would be singing as a cantor. But he, at that time, was working on the AIPAC. They had a newsletter, and he was their editor. He then became reporter for the Jerusalem Post. And he was a very good reporter, so people would interview him all the time on the Middle East. And CNN would use him a lot, and then all of a sudden he got offered a job. Only because Wolf was the correspondent for Jerusalem Post, so he'd have a natural interest in a Jewish lawyer that was working in the Carter administration. So he probably interviewed him before. That'd be natural. If you ever worked in Washington, everything is trade. It's not money. The barter is influence, and the higher you get on the ladder to be able to be accepted. So people trade there for that position, for positions all the time. When I would go to Washington, even with Hartke, my vacation was going to New York, believe me, where you know you're bartering, at least for money. Here, it's just power and politics. It's an unbelievable place, Washington. And everybody is just moving and pushing just to get to something that someone else doesn't know, so they gain some power and influence. It's totally a place, but if you want to go skiing there, believe me. And I think it's inhuman in a way. I don't think there's a human quality that really possesses a lot of people. They're vicious, and they're power hungry, and they want to have influence. It's a rough place to live. I was representing a woman called Margaret Klausner, who was the head of the Herzliya film studio, and we were sitting around outside, and a German producer walks in, Hans Geisendorfer, pretty good director, I think. And he says, "You're the guy I want." I said, "No, you don't want me. I'm a 27-year-old lawyer." He says, "No, I want you." I says, "Why me?" He says, "Because you have the face for what I want." Yeah, I thought he's playing a bad guy. He wanted some. I didn't know what did I know? I'm adventurous. You want me? You got me. 500 mark a day. And he says, "I do want you." So I said, "Okay, I'll be an actor." So I gave up my law practice for 6 weeks and became an actor. Everybody told me that would destroy my law practice. How can you, 27 years old, to leave? Jackie Mason, who was my client, was distraught. And he called me up. He said, "Why? What are you doing here as an actor? I'm supposed to be the actor." And I said, "So, but maybe I have the freedom to be an actor too." No, I'm very upset. I said, so tell me, why don't you take a telephone book? What's a telephone book have to do with it? I said, look up lawyers and find a new one. And that was the end of Jackie Mason with his career and me after we took him public. Look, you're 27 years old, you want to play games, so you become an actor. It's nice. Hazer Weitzman I first met when I was on the movie set with Geraldine Chaplin and Anna Karina. And Weitzman had his own Spitfire, and he flew in to a lot. And Geraldine Chaplin said, and he said, come on, we'll have a drink together. Hazer liked schnapps at that time. So we sat down, and she wouldn't sit with him. She said, he's a hawk, and I don't want to sit with Hazer Weitzman. And I met him then. Then I met him on a plane. We were both in first class sitting next to each other, and we had a really interesting conversation. And I said to him, you know, you probably read biographies. He says, yeah, I do. How do you know? I said, most egotistical do. Most egotistical people do. And he laughed. He had a hearty laugh. And he said, you're an interesting guy. We should stay in touch. And then I was formally introduced to him by Mutty Hudd, who was chief of the Air Force during the Six-Day War. And Weitzman had written a book called On Eagle's Wings and was looking for a New York lawyer to represent him. And his best friend at that time was Mutty Hudd. So Hudd was a client of mine, and he said to Weitzman, you should use Leon Charney. So I met Weitzman, and the day before the Likud election, he gave me his power of attorney. He said, all right, get me a deal. That's the way it was on my book. And I did. He said, by the way, tomorrow I'm going to be the defense minister of Israel. I said, well, if you do that, you're blowing everybody out in history of Israel, because no Likud member ever won. Next day he won. He became the defense minister of Israel, and I was walking around with his power of attorney. So I thought that was a little risky. So I came back to Israel about 2 weeks later. I said, Mr. Minister, here's your power of attorney back. He says, thank you. And he says, let's have dinner tomorrow. I had dinner with him, and then he said, you know, let's have dinner again. Anyway, after 2 weeks, he really, we had a real chemistry together. And he said, you know what, I want you to have my power of attorney, even as defense minister. And that was the beginning of a great relationship. Concomitantly, Bob Lipschitz, who was counsel to President Carter, who just won the election, was a really good Jewish guy, but got in trouble with the Jewish lobby, and asked Wolf Blitzer at that time to recommend someone who could sort of weave him through that Jewish lobby business, and Wolf suggested me. And so Lipschitz gave me a call and asked me if I would come to see him at the White House. And I told him I was in Israel. When I get back, I would do it. After that, Sadat decides to visit Israel, which was historic. The White House, I think, is a bit surprised by it. And Lipschitz says to me, you know, I know you're friendly with Weitzman. Could you find out more about what's going on and report back to me? Well, tell me. And I said, okay. And I told Weitzman I was reporting to Lipschitz, really to Carter through Lipschitz. And I told Carter I was talking to Weitzman. So you have the beginning there of a backdoor channel. Everything. Everything. He's a brilliant guy. He had foresights into everything, and we had a great chemistry. Weitzman once made a remark that if I think he made it to a newspaper, if I had to take a boat around the world and spend 7 days with anybody, the only guy I want to be with is Leon Charney. It's chemistry. We just got along well, and our intellects match very well. You could say 2 words, I understood everything. He could say, give me a wink, and I understood everything. I was known as the theatrical lawyer in Israel. I had had some clients there. People knew me as the theatrical lawyer, and HUD contacted me. He wanted to do a film about the Israeli Air Force, and he saw me, and we became friendly. In Israel, it's very typical on Friday afternoons to visit friends. They all get together. And I became part of Mati Hud's clique on Friday afternoon, and he was living in Tsahala, which is a place where high-level generals and politicians live, so everybody would gather, and I was becoming a known guy in Israel. Very, very known. Well, literally, when the war broke out, I was singing as a cantor in Paterson, New Jersey. And Yom Kippur's a solemn day, so you never hear anything, but you heard buzzing, boom, boom, everybody was talking, you know. And they said that there was a war going on, that Egypt had invaded Israel. And so I called Hartke that night, and I said, you know, Senator, we got to do something. This stuff is terrible, and we got to help. He said, okay, I'll call the embassy, and maybe I'll fly over there, and maybe you'll come with me. And I said, okay, we'll go. At the end of the day, Hartke couldn't go, but I went on behalf of the Senate to see how much arms and ammunition the Soviet Union was providing to the Egyptians, and it was pretty bloody. Now, what's important about that story is that there was a big fight in the United States that time between Kissinger and Nixon and who should arm Israel. And Schlesinger, who was the Defense Department Secretary of Defense. And I was in touch with a woman called Flora Lewis, who worked for the New York Times. And I was to break a story that the United States was holding back all its ammunition to Israel if they did not let go by a certain time. And I was in touch with the military mission of Israel in the United States. A friend of mine, Micha Paz, who was like number 2 at that mission, was in a panic. And he said, you have to do something. I think Yaakov Drori is the name of the guy who had the mission. And so they were after me to try and put pressure on the United States to release the ammunition. And I was at TWA terminal. At those days, there was still a TWA. It was 10 to 7. And I got a call from Paz. I called him, and he said they just had a signal that they're going to load the ammunition in Virginia, and you don't have to call Flora Lewis. And I called Flora Lewis at 7 and told her that the story is killed. It was amazing. And then I flew to Israel, first to Paris and then to Israel, and I was a high priority guy because I guess the embassy had told the Israeli government I was coming. I remember being on a plane with Isaac Stern, the violinist, and he wanted to sit the first seat in first class, and I had priority over him. So he complained to the captain, and I said to him, you're Stern, right? You're the fiddle player, right? He said, I'm a violinist. I said, okay, but I'm sitting here and you're sitting. I was dead tired, you know, gave a damn about who he was. Later on in Israel, we both did a TV show. We made up, and we were both sort of entertaining the troops. And he was a good guy. He came over to try and help the troops, and he was a heavy guy, so he wanted to have a better seat on the plane than I did, but I didn't give it to him. We go to Israel, we land in a blackout. I mean, it's terrible, it's terrifying, and in order to legitimize myself, I take a press card from Joe Franklin, WOR, but I want to be incognito. My whole raison d'etre for being in Israel at that time was to examine exactly the infiltration of Soviet Union armaments to Egypt and report it back to the Senate, where Hartke would make a big thing out of it. So I had twofold purposes: to use the Senate to make sure that Nixon gave ammunition to the Israelis because they were basically out of it, and 2, to inform them how much the Soviet Union was giving to them. But I go to a press conference and I'm trying to be incognito, and they call on me. Golda calls on me. I remember the picture. for a question. And the whole country sees me because it's nationally televised. And I'm there. I said, I'm here for WOR. I remember the question. I said, do you think the United States government is doing enough to help Israel at this time to support it? And I knew that they were. But I had to think of a question. I looked like a dumb journalist. And this was televised all over the country. She was there with Dado Al-Azhar, who was the chief of staff. This was a very famous press conference. If you read the history of '73, Israel nearly thought they were going to use an atomic bomb at that point. Dayan was very depressed. The south was falling, the north was falling. It was a bad time, and there were no lights. You landed in the airport without lights. It was pretty eerie. But, some people who are crazy get adrenaline out of these things, especially reporters. They love wars. If you remember the Gulf War, these three guys on CNN, they were under the caves, wherever they were, reporting back, Holderman and Arnett and whatever they were. So war is a crazy time. I visited Syria without a passport because I was a press guy. So I'd have a military escort, and all of a sudden the rockets were coming. I missed the rocket by about a half inch. And I said, Schmuck, what are you doing here? You could be heaving peanuts in Madison Square Garden. What the hell am I doing here? And then I recirculated and went into the Egypt, through the Suez Canal, right behind Arak Sharon's brigade, to see what the Egyptians were doing in terms of ammunition, taking pictures all the time, and then flying back to the Senate. Vance Hartke, who wanted to know. I had nothing to do with the secret agencies at all. It had to do only with Vance Hartke, who wanted to know, because then he would call Brezhnev maybe and say, you know what, you shouldn't be doing that, because he had some kind of unique relationship with the Soviet Union. You see rockets that land in Israel, and you see this, or you see tanks that are destroyed. You take pictures. You don't have to have everything. I don't think I found the atomic bomb, but you just show how much ammunition was flooding in from Egypt, and you take it back and you bring. I have the pictures, I remember, and it's Soviet insignias on everything. It's more for perception and demonstration to the Senate as to what's going on, and maybe it was political, because Hartke was a Democrat, and maybe they were trying to say Nixon was holding back. At that time, Kissinger stopped everything at Kilometer 101, and he tried to make a deal between Golda Meir and Egypt, and he flew to Russia to try and negotiate it. Kissinger was doing his shtick. He was doing his stuff. I think Hartke just wanted to have information so that he could speak on the Senate floor and say, here, my counsel is over there, he saw this, and I'd like to report this to the Senate. No, the bank scandal was basically part of the Likud party. Menachem Begin was very involved with that. Not involved, but I mean, he saved Ben Zion, who was the owner of that bank. No, I don't think it brought down the Labor Party at all. They were tired. The people were tired, and Menachem Begin had a great campaign where he really was able to get the Sephardic Jews to vote for the Likud, because they were a disadvantaged group by the Labor Party. The Labor Party was the Founding Fathers' party, and they didn't pay great attention to the poor and to the Sephardic Jews. And Menachem Begin was a hero to those people, and that's the way they won the election. There's no question about it. They were imperious, a little bit like Golda. Tough, a loner, basically a loner. Not very gregarious. He was the brother-in-law of Weitzman. They were married to sisters. And he had this image with the patch over his eye as being a great general, but he had a terrible fall in the Yom Kippur War. He was the defense minister at that time, and he had to take a lot of blame for Israel being surprised by that war. So he had a real fall after that. And Begin resurrected him by making him a foreign minister. which is an unusual move because he was a labor guy, and he made him his foreign minister. And he had a crazy personality. I know his military attaché who said he could go through battles and they could fire bullets at him, he wouldn't care. And yet when he had to make decisions, he couldn't make decisions. So he was a complex person, Dayan, but became an international hero because of the way he looked in the Six-Day War. Weitzman told me a story that he resigned from the Air Force one night and next day became the Minister of Transportation, and he wrote Dayan a note as his brother-in-law telling him the whole story, and Dayan wrote back, "Good luck." He was cold, disaffected, you know. That's the main story I heard about Dayan and Weitzman. He said, "Good luck." Begin was a highly intellectual guy. He was sort of a trained lawyer. He was very, his past was guided by the Holocaust. He had spent some time in Poland. He was born in Poland. He was very much involved saving Jews. He's very Jewish-minded. I remember on Tisha B'Av, which is a fast day, he came on television in the United States and said that to the people of the world, today is one of the saddest days in Judaism because the temples were destroyed, and he would make sure everybody knew that he was a Jewish prime minister and very strong on it. Sadat was sort of a visionary type guy, and he was a grand visionary. And they were, I think, totally different people. But I think they got along, basically. I think they used Weitzman. Weitzman was a charismatic guy, and Sadat and Weitzman really got along great. And I think Weitzman's resources in that area were the thing that saved Israel during that whole period. Sadat and Weitzman really were close, very close, and they really admired each other. Begin was carrying the weight of his country, and he did it in a very formal way. And Sadat, I'm sure, did it the same with Begin, but with Weitzman, he would lower, and he would keep this great friendship going. So I think that's a good question, but I think without Weitzman, this whole thing wouldn't have evolved or revolved. I don't think it could have been done just with Begin and Sadat alone. Weitzman had broken his leg and was in the hospital, and heard that Sadat was coming, and I was in the White House. And the White House was asking me all kinds of questions. What do I think it means, Sadat being there, and this and that? And I called Weitzman from the White House, and I said, "What do you think this means?" He says, "Leon, Jolly, I don't know, but if I got to get there on crutches, I'm getting there to see that. I'm going to meet him. I don't care." And there's a great picture of Weitzman getting to the Knesset with crutches and greeting Sadat with crutches. And he knew that this was a grand opening and that he wanted to be part and parcel of it, so he did. And then he knew that I had this ability to talk to the president either through Lipschitz or myself, so I guess he put it all together in his head that this is a huge, huge happening. The country of Israel went crazy. I mean, this is incredible to think of Sadat addressing the Knesset, you know. No more war, you know, his famous speeches. And it was a fascinating, fascinating turn of events. No, Begin had his place. You got to give Begin a lot of credit. He went forward with it. He had a lot of opponents in his party towards the peace treaty. Yitzhak Shamir was against it. Moshe Aarons was against it. Many of his people in Likud were against it. So you got to give him great credit for being, having the capacity to go forward, and he'll go down in history for that.
Here's Leon singing Hineni. Thanks for watching. Tune in next week.
Hineni, Hineni, Heyoni mimavas. Nirash v'nivchad, Nirash v'nivchad, Mipachad Yosef Tilos Yisrael Basi Basi Lamoid Lischane Lifonecha Alamecha Hineni Oni Mimas, I come and stand before you with fear and trepidation, because I am praying on behalf of the people of Israel, and I do so with humility and with hope that you will accept my prayer on behalf of the congregation. It's a beautiful prayer.
Tachas kanfei hashchino